It started, as most heartbreaks do, with a quiet kind of magic. Not the fireworks and fairy tale kind, but the deep, comforting hum of something truly right. Liam. Even now, his name tastes like ash and regret, but back then? Back then, it was sunshine and possibility. We met at a mutual friend's low-key art show opening, all exposed brick, indie music, and the faint scent of turpentine. He had this easy laugh, a crinkle around his eyes that made him seem perpetually amused by the world, and a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. I was 25, fresh out of a soul-crushing job, and still figuring out what adulting even meant. Liam, a few years older, seemed to have it all together. He was a graphic designer, always talking about his big projects, his freelance gigs, his dreams of opening his own studio. He had this quiet confidence that I, frankly, envied. Our first date was coffee, then it stretched into an impromptu walk through the city, talking for hours until the streetlights hummed on. He listened. Really listened. Not just waiting for his turn to speak, but absorbing, asking follow-up questions, making connections I hadn't even realized were there. I told him about my vague aspirations of becoming a content strategist, about my fear of failure, about the tiny, ambitious seed of an idea I had for an online platform that would connect independent artists with small businesses. He didn't laugh or dismiss it. He leaned forward, eyes alight, and said, "Maya, that's brilliant. Seriously. The market is hungry for that kind of bridge." His belief felt like a warm blanket on a cold night. Within 6 months, we were living together in a cozy, slightly too small apartment in the city's vibrant arts district. It had character, if you overlooked the perpetually leaky faucet and the questionable wiring. We painted the walls a soft sage green, filled it with thrift store finds and the occasional piece of art from his friends. Mornings were coffee and shared news articles on the worn sofa. Evenings were takeout and Netflix, or him sketching while I brainstormed ideas for my platform, which I'd tentatively named ArtBridge Connect. He'd often look over my shoulder, offering suggestions, telling me I was a natural. His encouragement was a constant, gentle hum in the background of my life. It felt like we were building something, not just a home, but a future. A shared one. Every decision, every tiny step, felt collaborative. He was my rock, my sounding board, the person who made me believe I could actually do this. I was still finding my footing, still a little unsure of myself, but with Liam, I felt safe. I felt seen. I felt like I was finally where I was supposed to be. He'd often say, "We're a team, babe." Always. And I believed him. Every single word. The routine settled in, a comfortable rhythm that felt like coming home. Our mornings began with the soft clatter of coffee mugs and the shared silence of reading. Liam, always the early riser, would already be at his makeshift desk in the corner of the living room, hunched over his tablet, sketching. I'd wake up a little later, pull on his oversized hoodie, the one that smelled faintly of his cologne and coffee, and pad into the kitchen. He'd already brewed my preferred dark roast, just the way I liked it, with a splash of oat milk waiting. It was these small, consistent gestures that built the foundation of our perceived stability. He remembered everything. My favorite blend, the way I liked my eggs, the obscure band I'd mentioned once in passing that he'd then surprised me with tickets to. He was attentive, almost to a fault. Our evenings were a ritual of winding down. We'd cook together, often simple pasta dishes or stir-fries, chatting about our days. He'd tell me about a particularly challenging client or a breakthrough in a design concept, and I'd share my progress on ArtBridge Connect. I was still in the early stages, building the wireframes, researching potential users, drafting business plans. It was a slow, painstaking process, and there were days I felt overwhelmed, ready to throw in the towel. But Liam was always there. A steady presence. "You've got this, Maya," he'd say, squeezing my hand across the table. Rome wasn't built in a day. And neither is a revolutionary platform. He made me feel like my little idea was monumental, world-changing. His belief in me was a powerful fuel. Weekends were for exploring. We'd wander through local markets, hunt for vintage treasures in dusty antique shops, or spend hours in art galleries, discussing pieces, dissecting techniques. He'd point out the subtle nuances in a painting, the clever use of negative space in a sculpture, and I'd absorb it all, feeling my own understanding of the art world deepen alongside his. He introduced me to his tight-knit group of friends, a mix of fellow designers, musicians, and writers. They were all incredibly warm and welcoming, and I quickly felt like I belonged. Liam was the charismatic center of the group, always making everyone laugh, telling witty anecdotes. I'd watch him, a swell of pride in my chest, thinking how lucky I was. He was everything I thought I wanted: talented, funny, supportive, and deeply, truly kind. We talked about the future, not in vague, hypothetical terms, but with a tangible sense of planning. We'd discuss saving for a bigger place, maybe even a small house with a garden someday. He'd talk about how ArtBridge Connect would grow, how my vision would revolutionize the industry. And when it takes off, babe, he'd say, his eyes sparkling, we'll travel. See all those places we've always dreamed of. Paris, Kyoto, the Scottish Highlands, we had a running list. It wasn't just idle talk, it felt like a blueprint. He even suggested we open a joint savings account, a future fund for our shared dreams. I thought it was a beautiful idea, a concrete symbol of our commitment. He handled the logistics, setting it up online, linking it to both our primary accounts. I trusted him implicitly. Why wouldn't I? He was Liam. My Liam. The man who saw me, truly saw me, and loved me for who I was, and for who I was striving to become. The thought of a life without him was simply unimaginable. He was woven into the fabric of my everyday existence, a comforting, familiar presence that I had come to rely on, a silent promise of a forever that felt as real as the air I breathed. The first crack, barely perceptible at the time, felt more like a shift in the wind than a tremor in the earth. It began subtly, with Liam's work. He started staying later at his studio, a co-working space he shared with a few other designers. At first, it was just an hour here, an hour there. Big project, babe, he'd say, his voice a little tired but still warm. Clients on a tight deadline. I understood. I was building my own dream, I knew how demanding creative work could be. I'd leave dinner warming in the oven, send him a text saying, "Don't worry about it, just come home when you can," and try to busy myself with ArtBridge Connect. But the hours stretched. Soon, he was coming home well after I'd eaten, sometimes after I'd even gone to bed. Then came the dismissiveness. It wasn't overt, not at first. It was in the way his eyes would glaze over when I talked about a breakthrough with my platform's user interface, or a new artist I'd found who was perfect for the beta test. He'd nod, murmur "That's great, babe," but his gaze would be fixed on his phone, or drifting towards the TV. It was a subtle withdrawal, a quiet signal that my passions, once so captivating to him, were now less so. I'd tried to reignite his interest. "Remember how excited you were about the artist discovery feature?" He'd offer a quick, almost practiced smile. "Oh, yeah, totally. Just a lot on my mind with work, you know?" And I'd tell myself it was true. He was stressed. I needed to be more understanding. The phone became an extension of him, a new limb he couldn't detach. It was always face down on the table, or clutched in his hand, screen away from me. If it buzzed, he'd snatch it up, his thumb flying across the screen with a speed that suggested a practiced urgency. "Just work stuff," he'd mumble if I glanced over. One evening, I playfully reached for it, intending to send a silly text to a mutual friend from his phone. He flinched, pulling it back with a sharp, almost violent jerk. "Hey," he snapped, his voice unusually harsh. "Privacy, Maya. What are you doing?" I froze, my hand still outstretched. The air in the room thickened, suddenly cold. I was just going to text Sarah, I stammered, my cheeks flushing. He softened, a quick, almost imperceptible shift back to his charming self. Oh. Right. Sorry, babe. Just instinct. You know how protective I am of my work files. He gave a short, nervous laugh. I forced a smile, but the incident lingered, a tiny, sharp shard in my mind. Then there were the financial discrepancies. Nothing major, not yet. Just little things. He'd mentioned paying for a big software subscription for his work, or a new piece of equipment he needed, and I'd notice our future fund joint account wasn't growing as quickly as I'd anticipated, despite my regular contributions. When I asked about it, he'd wave a hand dismissively. Just a few unexpected business expenses, you know how it is. It'll pick up. We're still building that nest egg. His explanations were always vague, yet delivered with such an air of casual certainty that I felt foolish for even asking. He was the one with the established career, after all. I was the one still trying to get my idea off the ground. He must know what he was talking about. I started to feel a subtle shift in our dynamic. Before, it felt like we were equals, two people building something together. Now, it felt like I was constantly trying to keep up, to understand, to reassure myself. He'd occasionally make comments that, in retrospect, felt like tiny jabs. "You're so sweet, Maya, a real dreamer," he'd say, a faint patronizing tone I couldn't quite place. Or, "You worry too much. Just trust me, I've got this." It wasn't outright gaslighting yet, not the kind that makes you question your sanity, but it was the groundwork. It was the slow, insidious erosion of my confidence, replaced by a growing dependence on his expertise and his reassurances. The comfortable hum was still there, but underneath it, a faint, discordant note had begun to sound. I just hadn't recognized it as a warning bell. Not yet. The idea for ArtBridge Connect had been a slow burn, a quiet yearning for purpose beyond the cubicle farm I'd escaped. It started as doodles in a notebook, then became endless late-night research sessions, fueled by lukewarm coffee and an unwavering belief that independent artists deserved a better platform to connect with small businesses. I envisioned a curated marketplace, not just for selling art, but for commissioning bespoke pieces, for graphic design, for unique branding elements. It was ambitious, I knew. It required a significant investment of time, energy, and, eventually, money. My savings, accumulated from years of careful budgeting, were earmarked for this. It was my leap of faith. Liam, initially, had been my biggest cheerleader. He'd sit beside me on the sofa, his arm around me, as I sketched out user flows, his eyes scanning my notes. "This is genius, Maya," he'd say, his voice low and encouraging. "You're solving a real problem for so many creatives and businesses." He'd offer technical advice, suggest design elements, and even help me brainstorm potential features. He made me feel like I wasn't just dreaming, but doing. His enthusiasm was infectious, and it propelled me forward on days when self-doubt threatened to engulf me. As the project grew from concept to a tangible prototype, the financial aspect became more pressing. I needed to hire a freelance developer for some back-end work, invest in better software, and eventually, launch a small marketing campaign to attract early adopters. I'd meticulously budgeted everything, creating spreadsheets that tracked every penny. I showed them to Liam, seeking his professional opinion. He was, after all, the business-savvy one. He ran his own freelance graphic design studio, or so he said. He'd nod, his brow furrowed in concentration as he reviewed my figures. "Looks solid, babe," he'd say, then pause. "But you know, the tech world is tricky. There are always hidden costs, unexpected delays. You need a buffer. A significant one." He suggested I move a larger portion of my savings, almost 80% of what I had, into our future fund joint account. That way, he explained, it's all in one place, easy to access for ArtBridge expenses, and it's building interest. Plus, it shows a united front for our future, right? He smiled, that charming, crinkly-eyed smile that always disarmed me. I hesitated. 80% was a lot. It was almost everything I had. But his logic seemed sound. It was for our future, for my dream, which he'd always framed as our dream. He talked about synergy and leveraging assets. He even suggested he could manage the funds within that account, ensuring they were allocated efficiently for ArtBridge, and perhaps even investing a small portion in a safe, high-yield option he knew about, just to make my money work harder for me. Think of it as me being your financial co-pilot, he joked, playfully nudging my shoulder. You focus on the creative, I'll handle the boring money stuff. It felt right. It felt like trust. He was so confident, so reassuring. He had more experience with investments, with running a business. I was still learning. So, I did it. I transferred the bulk of my savings into the joint account. He handled the investment part, showing me a screenshot of a dashboard with impressive-looking graphs and numbers that seemed to be steadily climbing. See, he'd said, beaming. Told you it was a good idea. Your money's already working for you. A wave of relief washed over me. I was doing it. I was finally taking a real, tangible step towards my dream, and I had Liam, my partner, my co-pilot, by my side, handling the complex financial bits so I could focus on what I did best. The thought of him managing my money, protecting my future, felt like the ultimate act of love and partnership. It solidified my belief that we were truly in this together, a formidable team against the uncertainties of the world. It was a beautiful, terrifying, exhilarating leap, and I took it, hand in hand with the man I trusted more than anyone. The subtle shifts began to coalesce into something more concrete, a persistent hum of unease beneath the surface of our lives. Liam's late nights at the studio became the norm, punctuated by vague excuses. Client emergency, or big pitch tomorrow, gotta nail it. He'd come home smelling faintly of stale coffee and something else, something I couldn't quite place, a metallic tang that wasn't his usual cologne. I tried to ignore it, to attribute it to the late hours and the stress of his demanding job. But the knot in my stomach tightened a little more each day. His phone, once a mere accessory, had transformed into a fortress. It was always locked, always face down, always within arm's reach. If I ever picked it up to move it, even just to clear space on the coffee table, he'd materialize beside me, snatching it with an almost frantic urgency. Just tidying up, I'd say, trying to sound casual, but his eyes would be narrowed, a flicker of suspicion in them. Right, he'd respond, his voice flat. He'd started taking calls in the hallway, or stepping out onto the small balcony, his voice hushed, his back to me. When he returned, he'd offer a curt, just my mom, or work call. But the conversations felt too intense, too private for casual family updates. The gaslighting, once a whisper, grew louder. If I brought up his increased secrecy, or the dwindling balance in our joint future fund despite my consistent contributions, he'd turn it around on me. You're being paranoid, Maya, he'd say, his tone laced with a weary patience that made me feel instantly guilty. Are you checking up on me? Don't you trust me? His eyes would widen slightly, feigning hurt. After everything we've built, you're going to question my commitment? My integrity? He'd make me feel like I was the problem, that my concerns were irrational, a sign of my own insecurity. He'd sigh dramatically, run a hand through his hair, and say, I'm working my ass off for us, for our future, and this is the thanks I get? Constant suspicion? And just like that, I'd be apologizing. Feeling ashamed for daring to voice my worries. He was a master at turning the tables, at making me doubt my own perceptions. My friends, bless their observant hearts, started to pick up on it. Sarah, my oldest friend, came over for our weekly wine night. As Liam left for one of his late nights, she watched him go, then turned to me, her brow furrowed. "He's different, May. He seems distracted. And a bit cold, don't you think?" I immediately jumped to his defense. "Oh, he's just stressed with work, you know? Big projects, tight deadlines." Sarah just nodded slowly, a knowing look in her eyes that I chose to ignore. Another friend, Chloe, noticed how he'd cut me off mid-sentence during a group dinner, or subtly mock my dreamer tendencies with a dismissive wave of his hand. "He used to hang on your every word," Chloe murmured to me later, a hint of concern in her voice. "Now it's like he's barely listening." I brushed it off, attributing it to the natural evolution of a long-term relationship, the comfort that sometimes breeds a little less formality. But their observations, though dismissed, planted tiny seeds of doubt in my mind, seeds that would eventually blossom into a bitter harvest. The biggest red flag, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time, was the increasing vagueness surrounding his big projects. He used to share every detail, every client, every design challenge. Now, it was just a big corporate client, or a confidential project. When I pressed for details, he'd become evasive, or snap, "It's classified, Maya. You wouldn't understand the complexities." The investment account, the one he was supposedly managing, also became a source of quiet anxiety. The dashboard he'd shown me, with its impressive graphs, seemed to have disappeared. When I asked to see it, he'd say, "Oh, the platform's down for maintenance," or "I've moved it to a more secure, private server for better returns." His explanations were always just plausible enough to quiet my immediate questions, but they left a lingering sense of unease. The comfortable hum of our relationship was now punctuated by increasingly jarring notes, a discordant symphony of half-truths and evasions. I was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to appease him, to understand him, to make sense of the growing distance between us. The woman who had once felt so safe, so seen, was slowly, imperceptibly, shrinking. The anniversary was supposed to be a reset. Our 3-year mark. 3 years of shared laughter, quiet mornings, ambitious dreams. 3 years of building a life together. I wanted it to be special, a reminder of everything we had, everything we were. I booked a table at the Ember Room, an upscale bistro we'd always talked about going to, known for its intimate atmosphere and incredible tasting menu. I'd spent weeks planning, picking out the perfect dress, even getting my hair done. I wanted to surprise him, to show him how much I still cherished us. I wanted to remind him of the magic, to bring back the easy laughter, the genuine connection that felt like it had been slowly eroding. I arrived at the restaurant a little early, my heart a flutter of nerves and anticipation. The hostess led me to our secluded booth, draped in soft velvet, bathed in the warm glow of dim lighting. I smoothed my dress, checked my reflection in the small mirror beside the table, and practiced my opening line. I had a small, carefully chosen gift for him, a vintage first edition of a graphic novel he adored, something I'd hunted down for months. I imagined his face lighting up, his crinkly-eyed smile. I imagined us toasting to 3 years, to many more, to ArtBridge Connect, to our future fund, to all our shared dreams. He arrived 15 minutes late, not unusual for him lately, but still a little sting. He looked different. His usual easy charm was replaced by a tautness around his jaw, a strange, almost detached look in his eyes. He didn't offer an apology for his lateness, just a curt nod to the hostess and slid into the booth opposite me. "Hey," he said, his voice flat. No smile. No warmth. My carefully constructed anticipation began to crumble. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "Happy anniversary, babe." I reached across the table, intending to take his hand. He pulled it back, reaching for the water glass. The waiter came, took our drink orders. The silence between us stretched, thick and uncomfortable. I tried to make conversation, talking about my day, a funny thing that happened with a friend. He barely responded, offering only monosyllabic answers, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. My stomach churned. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This wasn't us. Then, he cleared his throat. Maya, he began, his voice low, almost clinical. We need to talk. My heart plummeted. I knew that phrase. Everyone knows that phrase. It's never good. I braced myself, my hands clenching under the table. I don't think this is working anymore. The words hung in the air, sharp and cold, cutting through the soft jazz music and the gentle murmur of other diners. I stared at him, my mind refusing to process. What are you talking about? I whispered, my voice barely audible. He sighed, a long, exasperated sound. Look, Maya, it's not you. It's us. Or rather, it's me. I need something different. Something more. You're great, you really are, but you're just not what I need right now. He spoke as if he were reading from a script, his gaze carefully avoiding mine. He made it sound like I was a faulty appliance, a mismatched puzzle piece. He continued, his voice picking up a cruel, detached cadence. And honestly, Maya, this whole ArtBridge thing? It's cute, but it's never going to go anywhere. You're too much of a dreamer. You need to be more realistic. I need someone who's grounded. Who understands the real world. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not just the breakup, but the casual, brutal dismissal of my dream, the very thing he had championed for so long. My eyes stung. Tears welled, blurring the elegant restaurant around me. But, our future fund? I choked out, the words catching in my throat. Our plans? Everything we talked about? He actually scoffed. Future fund? Maya, that was just a concept. You really thought I was serious about all that? Look, I've been doing well with my own investments, and frankly, your contributions were negligible. It was more of a symbolic gesture, really. He stood up, pushing his chair back with a scrape that echoed in the sudden silence of my world. I'm sorry, Maya. It's just not working. I'll have my stuff out of the apartment by the end of the week. You can keep the furniture, I don't care. He pulled out his wallet, threw a couple of crumpled bills onto the table, enough to cover his half of the drinks, maybe. Consider this a clean break. And then he walked away. Just like that. In the middle of our anniversary dinner. In a public place. Leaving me, shattered and humiliated, amidst the clinking of glasses and the hushed conversations of strangers. The vintage graphic novel, still clutched in my hand, felt impossibly heavy. The magic was gone. Replaced by a gaping, bleeding wound. The world tilted. The elegant restaurant, moments ago a haven of soft lights and hushed conversations, warped into a dizzying kaleidoscope of blurred faces and echoing sounds. Liam's retreating back was the last thing I saw clearly before everything dissolved into a hot, stinging haze. My vision swam with tears, but they refused to fall, trapped by a raw, burning humiliation that seized my throat. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was encased in concrete. He was gone. Just gone. Leaving me stranded in the velvet booth, the half-eaten bread basket, the untouched water glasses, and the phantom echo of his cruel words. Not what I need right now. Too much of a dreamer. Negligible contributions. Each phrase was a fresh stab, twisting the knife he'd already plunged into my heart. My hands trembled, the vintage graphic novel still clutched so tightly my knuckles were white. It felt like a cruel joke, a prop in a play designed solely to mock me. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes? An hour? Time ceased to exist. The waiter, a kind-faced man who had moments ago offered us wine, now approached cautiously, his brow furrowed with concern. "Ma'am? Is everything all right?" His voice was gentle, but it pierced the fragile bubble of my shock. All I could do was shake my head, a silent, helpless gesture. He seemed to understand. He quietly placed the bill on the table, then discreetly moved away, giving me space. I fumbled for my purse, my fingers numb, pulling out my card. The transaction felt surreal, a mundane act in the midst of an apocalypse. I stumbled out of the restaurant, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. The city lights, usually so vibrant and full of promise, now seemed to mock me, their brilliance too loud, too cheerful for the gaping void inside me. I walked. I don't know where. Just walked. My feet moved mechanically, one in front of the other, carrying a body that felt hollowed out, stripped bare. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably Sarah, wondering how dinner went. I couldn't answer. I couldn't speak. The thought of articulating the humiliation, the raw, searing pain, was unbearable. I eventually found myself on a park bench, the cold metal seeping through my thin dress. The silence of the park, broken only by the distant hum of traffic, was a stark contrast to the chaotic storm raging within me. The tears finally came, hot and relentless, a torrent of grief, anger, and profound shame. I sobbed, shoulders shaking, burying my face in my hands. How could I have been so blind? So foolish? Every memory, every shared laugh, every tender touch, now felt tainted, poisoned by the revelation of his contempt. He had played me, used me, and then discarded me with such casual cruelty. The words "negligible contributions" echoed loudest. My savings. The future fund. My ArtBridge dream. Had it all been a lie? A setup? The thought was a chilling, insidious whisper in the back of my mind, too terrible to fully confront. I wanted to believe it was just a cruel breakup, a sudden change of heart. But the way he dismissed my platform, my contributions, the very foundation of our shared financial planning, it felt too calculated. Too cold. I eventually dragged myself home, the apartment feeling vast and empty without him, yet still permeated by his phantom presence. His scent on the pillows, his coffee mug on the counter, his sketchbook on the table. Each object was a fresh wound. I collapsed onto the sofa, pulling a blanket around me, trying to disappear. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind replayed the scene at the restaurant, an endless, agonizing loop. His flat voice. His dismissive hand gesture. The way he just left. The humiliation was a physical ache, a burning brand on my soul. I was a broken thing, adrift in a sea of betrayal, with no anchor, no compass, just the chilling realization that the man I loved, the man I trusted, had been a stranger all along. The world had not just tilted, it had shattered. And I was left to navigate the shards. The days that followed were a blur of grief and inertia. The apartment, once our cozy sanctuary, felt like a mausoleum. Every object, every corner, held a ghost of Liam. His scent still lingered on the pillows, the faint aroma of his coffee still clung to the kitchen air, and the half-finished sketch he'd left on his desk felt like a cruel taunt. I moved through the motions of existence, a hollowed-out shell. Eating felt like a monumental effort, sleep was a fleeting, nightmare-ridden escape, and the thought of facing the outside world, of encountering anyone who might have witnessed my public humiliation, was unbearable. I pulled the blinds, plunging the apartment into a perpetual twilight, matching the darkness in my soul. My phone, a constant source of anxiety, buzzed incessantly. Texts from Sarah, Chloe, and other friends, full of concerned questions and offers of support. "Are you okay, May? What happened? He just left. Let us know if you need anything, we're here for you." I couldn't bring myself to respond. The shame was too profound. How could I explain? How could I articulate the depth of the betrayal? It felt too raw, too ugly to expose to anyone else. I just wanted to disappear, to vanish from the face of the earth, to escape the burning humiliation that seemed to cling to my skin. But even in the deepest troughs of despair, the human mind, stubbornly, resiliently, seeks answers. The phrase "negligible contributions" gnawed at me. It was a splinter in my mind, a discordant note in the symphony of my grief. I had poured my savings into that joint future fund. It wasn't negligible. It was almost everything I had. The thought, initially a quiet whisper, began to grow louder, more insistent. What exactly had happened to that money? One particularly bleak afternoon, as I lay curled on the sofa, staring blankly at the ceiling, a memory surfaced. Liam, showing me that impressive-looking dashboard, the graph steadily climbing. He'd said he'd moved it to a more secure, private server. But he'd never given me access. Not once. He'd always handled the boring money stuff. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. With trembling hands, I reached for my laptop. My fingers hovered over the banking app icon. I hadn't looked at our joint account since I'd made the large transfer months ago. Liam had always reassured me it was growing, that my money was working for me. I logged in, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The screen loaded. My breath hitched. The balance. It was almost zero. Not just low. Zero. A few paltry dollars, a pathetic remnant of my life savings. A wave of nausea washed over me. It couldn't be. This had to be a mistake. A glitch. I checked the transaction history. There were a few small, legitimate-looking withdrawals for ArtBridge expenses, a domain name registration, a software subscription, but then, a series of much larger, unexplained transfers. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Transfers to his personal account. And then, a massive, final withdrawal, just days before our anniversary dinner. The description was vague: investment liquidation. The blood drained from my face. The world didn't just tilt now, it spun violently. The grief, the humiliation, the shock of the breakup, all of it coalesced into a searing, white-hot rage. He hadn't just broken my heart, he had stolen my future. He hadn't just dismissed my dream, he had systematically siphoned away the very resources I needed to build it. The future fund was a sham. The investments were a lie. He had been bleeding me dry, slowly, meticulously, while I, naive fool that I was, had trusted him implicitly. The public breakup wasn't just cruel, it was a calculated exit strategy, a way to cut ties cleanly after he'd extracted everything he could. The negligible contributions wasn't just an insult, it was a cover-up. The betrayal was deeper, more insidious, more utterly devastating than I could have ever imagined. The tears stopped, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The fog of grief began to lift, replaced by a chilling clarity. I was no longer just heartbroken. I was a victim of fraud. And Liam, my charming, supportive Liam, was a thief. The initial shock of discovering the empty account was a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air. But as the numbers on the screen solidified into an undeniable truth, the numbness gave way to a cold, burning fury. My savings, years of careful budgeting and sacrifice, gone. My dream, ArtBridge Connect, now felt like a cruel mirage, its foundation ripped out from under me. Liam hadn't just broken my heart, he had systematically dismantled my future. I stared at the screen, tracing the fraudulent transactions with a trembling finger. The large transfers to his personal account, the investment liquidation that left me with nothing. It was all there, stark and undeniable. My mind raced, piecing together the subtle shifts, the vague excuses, the dismissive comments about my negligible contributions. It wasn't just a breakup, it was a meticulously orchestrated financial ambush. He had been playing me for a fool, charming me into a false sense of security while he systematically drained my resources. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it transcended mere heartbreak. It was a violation of trust on every conceivable level. My hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. The shame that had kept me isolated for days evaporated, replaced by a fierce, primal need for justice. I wasn't just a heartbroken ex-girlfriend, I was a victim. And victims, I realized with a sudden, chilling clarity, had rights. I scrolled through my phone, past the unopened messages from friends, until I found Sarah's contact. She was my rock, my oldest confidant, the one who had always seen through my rose-tinted glasses, even when I refused to. My fingers hesitated over the call button. How could I tell her? How could I admit the depth of my naivety, the extent to which I had been duped? But the alternative, bearing this crushing burden alone, was unthinkable. I took a deep breath, the air burning in my lungs, and pressed call. It rang twice before her familiar, warm voice answered. Maya. Oh my God, are you okay? I've been so worried. Her concern was a balm, but also a fresh wave of shame. Sarah, I choked out, my voice raw, barely a whisper. He didn't just break up with me. There was a pause on the other end, a beat of stunned silence. What do you mean, May? What else happened? She asked, her voice laced with a sudden urgency. He stole from me, I blurted out, the words tumbling out in a rush. He emptied our joint account. My savings. All the money for ArtBridge. It's gone, Sarah. He took it all. The dam broke. The tears, which had been held back by anger, now flowed freely, hot and bitter. I recounted everything, the future fund, the investments, the empty account, the fraudulent transactions. I told her about the anniversary dinner, his cruel words, the public humiliation. I didn't spare myself, detailing my own blindness, my foolish trust. Sarah listened patiently, her silence punctuated by gasps of disbelief and muttered curses. When I finally finished, exhausted and emotionally drained, there was a long pause. Then, her voice, low and steady, filled with a quiet fury that mirrored my own. That bastard, she hissed. That absolute, manipulative bastard. Maya, I am so sorry. But you know what? This isn't on you. This is on him. He's a con artist. And we are going to make him pay. Her words were a lifeline, pulling me from the depths of despair. What do I do, Sarah? I asked, my voice still trembling, but laced with a newfound determination. I don't even know where to start. First, she said, her voice firm, you don't blame yourself. Second, you gather every single shred of evidence. Every bank statement, every text, every email. And third, we get you some legal advice. This isn't just a breakup, May. This is fraud. And we are going to fight him. Her unwavering support, her immediate shift from comfort to action, was exactly what I needed. The victim was gone. In her place, a warrior was slowly, painfully, beginning to rise. The fight was just beginning. With Sarah by my side, the fog of despair began to dissipate, replaced by a laser-like focus. The first step, as she had insisted, was to gather every single piece of evidence. This wasn't just about my personal pain anymore, it was about building a case. Liam had meticulously crafted his deception, but he had also, unknowingly, left a trail. I started with my own bank statements. I downloaded every transaction record for my personal account, cross-referencing them with the joint future fund account. The large transfers, clearly initiated from my side, were undeniable. Then, the subsequent, suspicious withdrawals from the joint account, leading to his personal accounts, those were the smoking gun. I highlighted them, annotated them, creating a clear timeline of the financial bleed. It was sickening to see it laid out so starkly, the methodical draining of my hard-earned savings. Next, I tackled our digital footprint. I scrolled through old text messages, emails, social media DMs. I was looking for anything that contradicted his claims, anything that showed his true intentions, or even just subtle hints of his duplicity. It was a painful excavation, revisiting conversations that once felt loving and now reeked of manipulation. I found messages where he'd enthusiastically discussed our future fund, where he'd reassured me about the high-yield investments, where he'd praised ArtBridge Connect and my vision. Each message, once a comfort, now felt like a fresh betrayal. I took screenshots of everything, meticulously organizing them into folders on my laptop. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, suggested I check his online presence beyond what he'd shown me. People leave digital breadcrumbs, May, she'd said, her eyes narrowed in thought. Especially narcissists. They can't resist boasting, even if it's to a private audience. I hadn't thought of it. My initial search had been limited to his public profiles. But what about the hidden corners of the internet? I started with a deep dive into social media. I searched for his name, his old usernames, variations of his professional handles. It was a tedious process, but then I found it, a private Facebook group, ostensibly for freelance designers, but with a surprisingly small, exclusive membership. I recognized some of his friends from our mutual circle, but also many unfamiliar names. And there, under a pseudonym he sometimes used for gaming, was Liam. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scrolled through the posts. It was a cesspool of casual misogyny, cynical boasts, and thinly veiled contempt. And then I saw them. Posts about me. Not by name, but undeniably about my naive girlfriend or the little dreamer. He'd bragged about securing a new revenue stream by managing her savings. He'd openly mocked my ArtBridge Connect idea, calling it a pipe dream and a money pit. He'd shared screenshots of my enthusiastic texts about our future fund, accompanied by laughing emojis and comments like, "She actually believes this BS." His friends, his supposed colleagues, chimed in with equally vile remarks, egging him on. The blood ran cold in my veins. This wasn't just financial fraud, it was social and emotional sabotage. He had not only stolen my money but had actively, gleefully, humiliated me behind my back, to an audience of his peers, some of whom I had considered friends. The charming, supportive Liam was a carefully constructed facade. The real Liam was a cruel, calculating predator. I kept scrolling, the bile rising in my throat. There were photos too. Photos of him on lavish vacations, at expensive restaurants, wearing designer clothes, all purchased, no doubt, with my money. And then, the ultimate gut punch, a photo of him, arm around a woman I didn't recognize, smiling broadly, captioned, "New Beginnings." So glad I finally cut ties with the dead weight. The photo was dated 2 days after our anniversary dinner. The public breakup wasn't just an exit strategy, it was a grand announcement of his new life, funded by my stolen future. I took screenshots of everything. Every hateful comment, every mocking post, every photo. The evidence was overwhelming, damning. The pain was still there, a dull ache, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, unyielding resolve. This wasn't just about getting my money back. This was about exposing him. This was about reclaiming my dignity. The digital dig had unearthed not just evidence of fraud, but the rotting core of his character. And I was ready to bring it all into the light. The weight of the truth was crushing, yet strangely liberating. The initial shock and raw pain had given way to a cold, steady fury. The charming, supportive Liam I had known was a phantom, a meticulously crafted illusion. The real Liam was a parasite, a manipulator, a thief who had not only stolen my financial security but had also reveled in my humiliation behind my back. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, washing away the last vestiges of my naivety. I was no longer a heartbroken victim, I was a woman wronged, and I was ready to fight. I sat with Sarah for hours, poring over the evidence I'd meticulously gathered. The bank statements, the screenshots of his vile posts in the private group, the photo with the New Beginnings woman. Each piece was a nail in his coffin, a testament to his calculated cruelty. Sarah's face was a mask of grim determination, her eyes blazing with an anger that matched my own. "He's a textbook narcissist, Maya," she muttered, shaking her head. "They feed off of control and validation. And he just found a new source. How could I have been so blind?" "Sarah?" I whispered, the question a raw wound in my throat. I trusted him with everything. My dreams, my money, my heart. Sarah reached across the table, taking my hand. Her grip was firm, grounding. "You weren't blind, May. You were loving. You were trusting. He exploited that. That's on him, not on you. You're a good person. He's a monster." Her words, simple yet profound, began to chip away at the layers of self-blame I had wrapped myself in. We talked late into the night, strategizing. The immediate priority was legal action. This wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was a clear case of financial fraud. We discussed consulting a lawyer, exploring options for recovering my stolen funds. But beyond the legalities, there was a deeper, more primal need for justice. I wanted him exposed. Not just to the legal system, but to everyone he had fooled, everyone he had bragged to. I wanted his carefully constructed facade to crumble, just as mine had. The idea of a public reckoning began to form, a slow, deliberate burn in my mind. It wasn't about revenge in the petty sense, it was about truth. It was about reclaiming my narrative, about showing the world the true face of the man who had so cruelly dismissed and exploited me. But it had to be done right. It had to be impactful. It had to be undeniable. I found myself replaying every conversation, every interaction with Liam, seeing them through this new, horrifying lens. His late nights, were they with her? His vague business expenses, were they funding his lavish lifestyle and secret affairs? His dismissive comments about ArtBridge Connect, were they designed to undermine my confidence so I wouldn't question his financial management? The layers of deceit were staggering, each revelation more sickening than the last. The internal confrontation was the hardest. It wasn't with Liam, but with the version of myself who had loved him so fiercely, so blindly. I mourned the loss of that naive, trusting girl. But with that mourning came a fierce resolve. She was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, forged in the fires of betrayal. I felt a tectonic shift within me, a hardening of my resolve, a sharpening of my focus. The pain was still there, a dull ache, but it no longer paralyzed me. It fueled me. "He won't get away with this, Sarah," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor that had plagued it for days. "He won't. I'm going to expose him. All of it." Sarah nodded, a determined glint in her eyes. "I know, May. And I'm with you every step of the way. We're going to build a case so solid, he won't know what hit him." The conversation was a turning point. The victim had shed her skin. The warrior was ready. The fight was on. The days that followed were a whirlwind of quiet, methodical action. The raw emotion of the initial discovery had settled into a cold, determined resolve. This wasn't about lashing out, it was about precision. It was about building an irrefutable case against Liam, one that would leave no room for doubt or his usual manipulative deflections. Sarah, true to her word, was my unwavering co-pilot, her practical mind a perfect counterbalance to my still recovering emotional state. Our first step was to consult a lawyer specializing in financial fraud. It felt daunting, stepping into that sterile office, laying bare the humiliating details of my deception. But the lawyer, a sharp, empathetic woman named Ms. Davies, listened patiently, her expression hardening as I recounted Liam's systematic theft. She reviewed my meticulously organized evidence, the bank statements, the screenshots of his vile social media posts, the timeline of his withdrawals. "This is a strong case, Ms. Evans," she affirmed, her voice calm but firm. "The financial fraud is clear. And the social media evidence paints a very damning picture of his intent and character." Ms. Davies advised me to compile every single piece of communication related to the Future Fund and ArtBridge Connect. I went back through my emails, searching for any correspondence from Liam about the investments, any vague promises or reassurances. I found a few, carefully worded, full of his usual charm and vague financial jargon. They were subtle, but in context, they screamed deception. I also looked for any digital receipts for ArtBridge expenses that he claimed to have paid for from the joint account. Most of them were either non-existent or for ridiculously small amounts compared to the massive withdrawals. I also reached out to a few mutual friends, cautiously at first. Not to gossip, but to gather more information, to see if anyone else had noticed anything, or if Liam had ever tried to borrow money from them under false pretenses. It was a delicate dance, but a few of them, particularly Chloe, had their own unsettling stories about Liam's recent behavior, his evasiveness, his sudden unexplained wealth. Chloe even mentioned a time Liam had jokingly complained about my overly ambitious ArtBridge idea, saying it was draining my energy, a comment that now felt like a precursor to his public dismissal. They hadn't connected the dots before, but now, with my story, the pieces clicked into place. They were horrified, offering their full support, and even volunteering to testify if needed. The most chilling part of the evidence gathering was realizing the extent of his social deception. The private Facebook group, where he had openly mocked me, was a goldmine of his true character. I spent hours scrolling through it, taking screenshots of every single post where he mentioned me, or alluded to his new beginnings with the other woman. The sheer audacity, the casual cruelty, was breathtaking. He had painted me as a naive fool, a burden, a dead weight, all while living off my savings. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the systematic dehumanization, the public humiliation he had orchestrated behind my back. Ms. Davies explained the legal process, filing a civil suit for fraud and potentially exploring criminal charges given the clear intent to defraud. She also discussed the possibility of a restraining order, given his manipulative nature. But beyond the legal channels, I knew I wanted a different kind of justice. I wanted his carefully constructed reputation, his charming facade, to be shattered. I wanted the people he had fooled, the people he had mocked me to see him for what he truly was. As I collected each piece of evidence, a strange sense of empowerment began to bloom within me. Each screenshot, each highlighted transaction, was a step towards reclaiming my narrative. The tears were gone, replaced by a steely glint in my eyes. The fear had dissipated, replaced by a quiet, simmering rage. I was no longer the naive girl who had been blindsided and humiliated. I was a woman armed with truth, meticulously preparing for battle. Liam had underestimated me. He had assumed I would simply disappear, broken and defeated. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The stage was being set. The curtain was about to rise. The plan solidified, a carefully constructed strategy born from anger, pain, and a fierce desire for truth. It wasn't enough to pursue legal action quietly, his public humiliation of me demanded a public reckoning. I wanted everyone who had seen his charming facade, everyone who had heard his casual dismissal of me, to witness its spectacular collapse. This wasn't about petty revenge, it was about reclaiming my dignity, about exposing a predator, and about warning others. The opportunity presented itself unexpectedly. Liam's studio, the co-working space he supposedly shared, was hosting an open house, a networking event for local artists, designers, and potential clients. He had, ironically, invited me to it months ago, back when we were a team. It was the perfect stage. A public setting, filled with mutual acquaintances, industry peers, and potential new victims. I spent days meticulously crafting my message. It couldn't be emotional, it had to be factual, undeniable, and devastating. Sarah, ever my strategic partner, helped me refine the wording, ensuring it was impactful yet legally sound. We decided on a multi-pronged approach, a direct, public confrontation, backed by irrefutable digital evidence, and a carefully prepared social media post that would go live simultaneously. On the day of the open house, I dressed not for a breakup, but for battle. A sharp, tailored blazer, dark jeans, and boots. My hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail. No makeup to hide my resolve. I felt a cold calm settle over me, a stark contrast to the trembling wreck I had been weeks ago. Sarah and Chloe arrived at my apartment, their faces grim but supportive. They were my backup, my witnesses, my emotional anchors. We arrived at the co-working space just as the event was in full swing. The room buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Liam was there, of course, holding court near the makeshift bar, his usual charismatic self, surrounded by a small cluster of people, some of whom I recognized. He was laughing, gesturing expansively, playing the role of the successful, charming designer. My blood ran cold, but my resolve hardened. I walked directly towards him, Sarah and Chloe flanking me. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, but my steps were steady. As I approached, Liam caught my eye. His smile faltered, a flicker of surprise, then annoyance, crossing his face. He clearly hadn't expected me. "Maya," he said, his voice laced with a forced casualness. "What are you doing here?" I stopped a few feet from him, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the ambient noise of the room. "I'm here, Liam," I began, my gaze unwavering, "because I have something important to share with everyone." A few heads turned. The conversation around us began to quiet. Liam's eyes narrowed, a hint of panic flashing in them. He tried to interrupt. "Maya, this isn't the time or place for this. Let's talk later." "No," I said, my voice rising slightly, gaining strength. "The time is now. The place is here. Because this is where you operate. This is where you build your facade." I pulled out my phone, connected it to a small, portable projector Sarah had brought, and aimed it at a blank wall. The screen flickered to life, displaying the first image, a screenshot of our joint bank account, showing the initial large deposit from my savings. 3 months ago, I announced, my voice ringing with authority, Liam here convinced me to transfer the vast majority of my life savings, money intended to launch my dream project, ArtBridge Connect, into a joint account, which he promised to manage for our future fund, ensuring high-yield returns. I clicked to the next slide, the transaction history, highlighting the massive withdrawals to his personal accounts. Within weeks, he systematically drained that account. Every penny. Leaving me with nothing. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Liam's face had gone ashen. He tried to step forward, to grab the projector, but Sarah subtly blocked his path. "This isn't all," I continued, my voice unwavering, fueled by a righteous anger. I clicked to the next series of slides, the screenshots from the private Facebook group. His mocking comments about me, about ArtBridge Connect, about securing a new revenue stream. The laughing emojis. His friend's vile remarks. The photo with the other woman, captioned "New Beginnings." While he was emptying my bank account, I stated, my voice laced with contempt, he was also publicly humiliating me in a private group, boasting about his deception, calling me naive and deadweight. He even celebrated his new beginnings with another woman, just 2 days after he publicly dumped me at our anniversary dinner. The room was silent. A stunned, palpable silence. All eyes were on Liam, whose face was now a mask of pure terror and rage. He was trapped. His facade had shattered. The charming, successful designer was exposed as a calculating thief and a cruel manipulator. A few people gasped. Others whispered, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. I saw several of his friends from the Facebook group exchange uncomfortable glances. This isn't just a personal betrayal, I concluded, my voice resonating with newfound power. This is financial fraud. And I have retained legal counsel. This is just the beginning of his reckoning. I clicked off the projector. The room, still silent, felt charged with the weight of my words. Liam stood frozen, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately searching for an escape that wasn't there. His public humiliation was complete. And mine, finally, avenged. The silence in the co-working space was deafening, thick with the weight of shattered illusions. Liam stood utterly exposed, his carefully constructed facade crumbled into dust. His face, moments ago a picture of charming confidence, was now a sickly shade of white, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and impotent rage. The crowd, initially stunned, began to buzz with hushed whispers, their gazes shifting between me, standing tall and resolute, and Liam, shrinking visibly under the collective scrutiny. A few of his friends from the private Facebook group, the ones who had laughed at his cruel jokes, now shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze. Some even started to discreetly back away, as if his toxicity might be contagious. The air, once filled with the convivial hum of networking, was now heavy with judgment and disgust. I watched him, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. The raw, searing pain of the breakup, the crushing humiliation, the sickening realization of the fraud, all of it had coalesced into this moment. And in this moment, watching him squirm, I felt nothing but a quiet, profound sense of vindication. It wasn't the explosive catharsis I might have expected, but a deeper, more satisfying peace. The truth, finally, was out. Liam, finding his voice, though it was thin and reedy, tried to bluster. "This is insane, Maya. She's making it all up. She's just a bitter ex-girlfriend." His words, however, lacked conviction, drowned out by the irrefutable evidence that had just been projected onto the wall. No one believed him. His usual charm, his manipulative prowess, had deserted him. "The evidence speaks for itself, Liam," I said, my voice calm, steady, and utterly devoid of emotion. "And it's all in the hands of my lawyer. Enjoy your new beginnings." With that, I turned, a subtle nod to Sarah and Chloe, and we walked out of the co-working space, leaving Liam to face the wreckage of his reputation. Stepping out into the cool night air, a deep breath filled my lungs, and for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like shattered glass. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that comes after a battle fought and won. Sarah and Chloe immediately enveloped me in a tight hug. "You were incredible, May," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely incredible." The aftermath was swift and decisive. The social media post I had prepared went live moments after we left the event, complete with all the screenshots and a concise summary of Liam's fraud. It went viral, spreading like wildfire through our mutual networks and beyond. People I barely knew reached out, expressing shock, support, and sharing their own stories of encountering manipulative individuals. The public outcry was immense. His studio quickly distanced themselves from him, and his freelance clients, alerted by the online storm, began to drop him. His professional reputation, once his most prized asset, was in tatters. Legally, Ms. Davies moved swiftly. The civil suit for fraud was filed, and with the overwhelming evidence, Liam's legal team had little ground to stand on. He tried to negotiate, to offer a partial settlement, but I refused. I wanted every penny back, and I wanted him to face the full consequences of his actions. The process was slow, emotionally draining, but I held firm. I attended every meeting, reviewed every document, my resolve unyielding. The true catharsis, however, wasn't just in the legal proceedings or the public exposure. It was in the quiet moments of rebuilding. The apartment, once a painful reminder of Liam, slowly began to feel like my home again. I rearranged the furniture, painted over the sage green walls with a vibrant, hopeful blue, and cleared out every last vestige of his presence. Each act was a small, defiant step towards reclaiming my space, my life. The financial recovery was gradual. It took months, but eventually, through a court order, a significant portion of my stolen savings was returned. It wasn't all of it, but it was enough. Enough to breathe again. Enough to restart ArtBridge Connect, this time with a clearer vision and a fierce independence. The money, once a symbol of his betrayal, was now a symbol of my resilience, my ability to fight back and win. The public justice had been satisfying, but the private healing, the slow, steady process of reclaiming my self-worth, was the true victory. The year that followed was a testament to resilience, a slow, deliberate climb out of the wreckage Liam had left behind. The legal battle, though protracted, eventually concluded in my favor. Liam was ordered to repay the stolen funds, and while it wasn't a full recovery, it was enough to breathe again, enough to rebuild. His professional reputation was irrevocably damaged, his social circle fractured. He disappeared from the city, a ghost of the charming man he once pretended to be. His public humiliation had been satisfying, a necessary act of truth, but the real victory was unfolding quietly, within me. The apartment, once a painful echo of his presence, transformed into a sanctuary. I repainted the walls a vibrant, hopeful teal, bought new furniture, and filled the space with art that truly reflected my taste, not ours. Every object, every color, was a conscious choice, a reclaiming of my personal space. The act of decluttering, of removing every last vestige of Liam, was deeply therapeutic. It was like shedding a heavy, suffocating skin. ArtBridge Connect, once a dream almost crushed by his deception, became my unwavering focus. I approached it with a newfound clarity and a fierce independence. There was no co-pilot now, no one to subtly undermine my confidence or siphon off my resources. It was all me. I hired a new, trustworthy freelance developer, meticulously managed my own finances, and poured every ounce of my renewed energy into building the platform. The initial launch was small, a quiet beta, but the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Artists were excited, small businesses were intrigued. It was slow, painstaking work, but this time it was authentic. It was mine. My friendships deepened. Sarah and Chloe, who had stood by me through the darkest days, became even more integral to my life. We had shared something profound, a battle fought and won. They celebrated my small victories, offered a shoulder to cry on when the lingering pain surfaced, and reminded me of my strength when I doubted myself. I also started to forge new connections, people who saw me for who I truly was, not through the distorted lens of a manipulative relationship. I started going to therapy, a decision I had initially resisted, but one that proved invaluable. It allowed me to process the trauma, to understand the dynamics of manipulation, and to heal the deeper wounds of betrayal. I learned to trust my instincts again, to recognize red flags, and most importantly, to value myself independently of anyone else's validation. The naive, vulnerable girl who had entered the relationship was gone. In her place was a woman who understood her worth, who had faced profound adversity and emerged stronger, wiser, and fiercely self-reliant. Dating? Not a priority. The thought of letting someone new into my carefully rebuilt world felt distant, almost alien. I was content with my own company, with my work, with my genuine friendships. I was learning to love my own presence, to find joy in my own achievements, to build a life that was truly authentic to me. One evening, a year and a half after the public reckoning, I was working late on ArtBridge Connect. The platform was gaining traction, slowly but steadily. I had just secured a significant partnership, a major milestone. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the city lights, a soft smile on my face. The journey had been arduous, marked by immense pain and profound disillusionment. But it had also been a journey of incredible growth. I had lost a relationship, but I had found myself. I had lost money, but I had gained invaluable wisdom. I had been humiliated, but I had reclaimed my dignity. The echo of Liam's words, too much of a dreamer, still occasionally surfaced, but now they sounded hollow, pathetic. My dream, once dismissed, was now a tangible reality, a testament to my resilience. I was no longer defined by his betrayal, but by my own strength, my own vision, my own unwavering belief in myself. The future, once a shared blueprint that had been violently torn apart, was now an open canvas, waiting for me to paint it, brushstroke by careful brushstroke, entirely on my own terms. And it was beautiful.